Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers.
Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are glad you're joining us this week for another listener request.
Yes, our fourth one, and we have one more to go after this.
We love you guys that much.
We do. And so to begin, we do want to extend a big thank you to everyone who has sent in case suggestions so far. We love hearing from you and sincerely wish we could cover every case that you have all sent to us. If we didn't cover your case suggestion this month, just know that we have made note of it and could cover it sometime in the future.
That means keep listening.
That's right, because you just never know when we might cover your case that you suggested. That being said, we received 2 different case requests from a listener in Ireland named Nicola. So shout out to you, Nicola. We hope you are listening to this episode. Both of the cases that she suggested took place in Northern Ireland. It was hard for me to choose which one to cover, but I ultimately chose the one for today because of my fascination with couple killers. I will never understand how 2 dirtbags can find each other and decide together that it's okay to end someone else's life. But unfortunately, that is exactly what happened in this case. 2 people lost their lives because of a dirtbag couple.
It is a fascinating scenario.
One is bad enough, but 2 is mind-blowing to me. We are going to start with the biggest dirtbag in the case, a Mr. Colin David Howell. Colin Howell was born in Portadown, Northern Ireland on March 14, 1959. Colin's parents, Sam and Sarah Howell, had 5 children in total, Colin being number 4. The children were raised in Woodvale, Belfast, and the family was said to be deeply religious. Colin looked up to his God-fearing father, and so he would go to the Baptist church sometimes 3 times a day to please his dad. Colin was described as being shy and having low self-esteem. Originally, he wanted to become a medical doctor, but because of his grades, he entered dental school instead and would eventually become a successful dentist. Once graduated, Colin went to India and Romania to provide free dental care for residents in those countries. When Colin was just 13 years old, he had said that he wanted to go on a service mission, and he had made that dream come true. On the outside looking in, Colin seemed to be on the right path. However, during university, he began struggling with pornography consumption. Colin had been sheltered growing up regarding anything to do with sex. He was taught only that premarital sex was a sin, and that was pretty much it. It didn't sound like he knew very much about it. I don't think their family talked about anything sexual other than to say that it was sinful before marriage.
And so then he gets into the big wide world of university and is probably exposed to so much.
Yeah. Perhaps he bought his first porno magazine out of curiosity, but either way, it would become something that he would struggle with during his adult life. So sex had been so taboo growing up that once he was out on his own in university, he really wanted to find out what this was all about.
Yeah, it was a free-for-all.
Yes. Also during uni in 1981, when he was 22 years old, Colin met his future wife, Leslie Ann Elizabeth Clark. Leslie was born in 1960 in Plymouth, England. They met at church, but were both students at the Queen's University in Belfast. Colin was taking dentistry, and Leslie was studying to become a nurse.
Was she the reason why he was so interested in pornography?
No, I think that started even before he met her.
Okay.
Despite his religious upbringing, Colin was unable to keep his hands off of his newfound love, and they became sexually involved with one another. As it happens sometimes, Leslie became pregnant. She wanted to keep the baby, but Colin insisted that she undergo an abortion. This was hard for Leslie, but she did it to go along with what Colin wanted. And the icing on the cake was that Colin made Leslie pay for the procedure.
What? Ouch.
It was said that Colin was actually quite controlling and manipulative of the women he dated and would easily get jealous.
He coerced her into having this abortion and paying for it herself.
Yes, because she really didn't want to.
That would have been so difficult for her.
It was. Colin went to the pastor of his church and asked for forgiveness. I am unsure if the pastor knew about the abortion part of the sexual transgression, because I read that the couple went to London, England to have the abortion, which makes me think that they didn't want anyone to know about what was happening. So I think he just confessed to having sex. What Colin seemed to fail to understand about repentance is the part about staying away from that sin going forward. I think he thought that if he just asked for forgiveness, he could keep on doing whatever he wanted. Kind of like sin now, repent later, and repeat type of mentality.
We didn't really learn anything from the experience.
Absolutely not. And this became evident when Leslie became pregnant 2 more times. And 2 more times, Colin made her abort the babies.
Oh, so she didn't learn either that he
No.
was going to make her do this.
Right.
And that he should have been kicked to the curb.
He definitely should have been. But this just added to the emotional distress for Leslie. It was becoming harder and harder for her.
Yeah, no kidding. She's really becoming a victim now.
Oh, definitely, right from the start. The couple dated for 2 years and were wed in 1983 in Belfast. Colin's family were more strict and did not want any alcohol to be served at the festivity. Leslie's family disagreed. They each stuck to their guns. Colin's side of the family did not drink, and Leslie's family wet their whistles. It made for an awkward start.
Okay.
They were extreme. And to further touch on when you asked about why she just didn't get rid of him at the beginning, it was said that they were both feeling guilty about the premarital sex, so they both felt like they should marry one another to help make it right.
No, that's unfortunate.
I want to point out that typically we don't mention much about religious views, but it is a big part of this case, so I am mentioning it. We see a pattern of almost a Jekyll and Hyde with Colin. He struggles with a propensity for good and evil. As newlyweds, Colin began shaping his dental career, and Leslie worked at the Royal Victorian Hospital in Belfast. Having traditional values, the couple decided to start their family fairly early on in their marriage. They were obviously very fertile. Their first child was born in 1984, the year after their wedding. After this child was born, they moved to Coleraine and joined the Coleraine Baptist Church there, where both of them became greatly involved in the church. Colin especially was becoming a quote-unquote pillar of the church community. He was head of the youth group, played the guitar for the Sunday meetings, and would drive the church bus for any off-site activities. From the outside looking in, this looked like a good life for the Howells, and they both did start out fairly happy. But you are listening to Buried Motives, so you already know that things are going to take a turn. Wanting to have more children and focus on their family, Leslie decided to stop working and stay home to rear their children. They went on to have 3 more children, totaling 4 children by 1991, pretty much 1 child every 2 years after their first. In 1986, after the couple's second child was born, Leslie began to suffer from postpartum depression. Her mother passed away just weeks before the baby was born, and so this was a really hard time for her. Colin was said to be controlling, but Leslie would sometimes leave the kids in his care to get out of the house just for a bit, and was able to stand up to him and his controlling ways at times. Things progressed and got stressful for the young family. They purchased their first house, and money was tight.
This sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. With Leslie tending to the family, Colin was able to further his career. He first worked as a dentist in Coleraine, but then was able to open his own practice in Ballymoney, eventually being able to afford a more luxurious lifestyle for him and his family, but that would take a few years into the future. While Colin was busy doing his thing, Leslie, who was mostly at home watching the kids, began to feel lonely. However, instead of helping to fill a void for his wife, Colin extended that offer elsewhere.
He started having an affair?
He did. Near the end of 1989, Colin reconnected with a lady friend from university. Around this time, Leslie was pregnant with their 3rd child. Colin spent a month having an affair with his old friend. Leslie found out about the affair after their 3rd child was born. Understandably, this added to her postpartum depression.
No kidding.
At this time, the pair talked about getting a divorce, but their religious views regarding divorce swayed them to stay together and try to make things work. Colin had confessed his affair to his pastor and was working on being forgiven. Colin believed that no matter what, he could just confess his sins and repent, and then all would work out okay.
So does he continue with this pattern?
He does. In reality, Colin's first affair was relatively short-lived, but its effects would be long-standing and be just the beginning of his hurtful and deadly transgressions. When Leslie was pregnant with their 4th child in 1990, Colin's eyes would once again begin to wander.
Was it every time she got pregnant?
Well, there was 2 major affairs and both times she was pregnant.
Ugh, dirtbag.
Totally. I have to say, if you cheat while your wife or significant other is literally growing your child inside of her, in my opinion, that makes you a massive dirtbag. Colin did this not once, but now twice. So my heart really goes out to Leslie.
That would be awful.
Yeah, when you're pregnant, you're already feeling vulnerable a lot of the time. And any guesses where Colin met his next lover?
At the office.
Nope.
Oh, at uni?
Nope. He's such a religious guy.
He met them at church?
At church.
Crazy.
Yes.
So how do they keep this hidden from people at church? There's always nosy gossips at church that see everything.
It's true.
Those little bitties, they see it all.
I know. And tongues were wagging around the congregation.
Oh, so it wasn't even hidden?
People weren't sure, but people did become suspicious eventually.
And nobody told Leslie?
Well, let me get into it. I'm going to start out by introducing you to our second dirtbag in this case, Mrs. Hazel Buchanan. Hazel was born Hazel Elkin on March 1st, 1963, just outside of Omagh, a town in Northern Ireland. She was raised on a dairy farm with her 9 siblings and was also raised in the Baptist church. Everyone pitched in on the farm, and everyone was strongly involved in the church. However, settling on a farm was not Hazel's dream. At the age of 18, she met her future husband, 22-year-old Trevor Buchanan. Trevor was a dashing young man and a Royal Ulster Constabulary hopeful. The Royal Ulster Constabulary, or the RUC, was the police force in Northern Ireland from 1922 to 2001. When Hazel and Trevor met, this was considered a prestigious career. Trevor had 5 brothers, and 3 of them were already RUC officers. Trevor was the youngest son in his family and was said to look up to his older brothers. I believe he had some sisters as well, but it seems like becoming an RUC officer was an easy career choice for Trevor. It also seems like everyone in this case came from larger families.
That seems on par for the place and time.
Absolutely. In 1981, not too long after beginning their courtship, the 2 young lovebirds were married. Trevor was not as religious as Hazel was, but he agreed to support her in the church and have a religious ceremony. Hazel's values were said to rub off on her new husband. Trevor stopped smoking and went to the pubs with his friends less and less often. He eventually became a respected RUC officer and provided Hazel and their children a good life. In 1986, Trevor and Hazel moved to Charnwood Park in Coleraine. At this point in time, they had 2 children, a daughter who was 5 and a son who was 4. Being devout Baptists, they joined the local congregation, the same congregation that Colin and Leslie attended.
And dun dun dun, they're going to meet.
They're going to meet, but it's going to take a while.
How do they meet without their spouses?
They meet with their spouses.
And then arrange private meetings without their spouses.
Exactly. But they didn't actually become intimate for 4 years after they moved to Coleraine.
So it was a slow burn.
Yeah. But once it started to burn, it was hot. By 1990, Trevor was now a high-ranking officer, and Colin was doing well for himself as a dentist. I believe he specialized in dental implants.
Were the couples friends?
I wouldn't say so much that they were friends, but they were friendly. They knew each other.
Okay. They sound like similar stations in life, similar ages, similar congregations, so you'd hang out on Friday night, no?
I don't think they hung out on Friday nights together, but they were definitely church friends.
Okay.
Both families were considered to be pillars of society and good church-going folk. Although things looked great on paper, Colin was feeling the pinch because he felt like his dental practice should have been doing better than it was. Plus, he and Leslie were renovating their new home in Knocklade Park, and the work was taking longer than he would have liked.
Oh, that's always the way with construction.
Yes. And so it's just kind of bleeding money. Leslie was also pregnant, and they already had 3 little kids running around. The birth of this baby would make 4 children in the span of 6 years for the couple.
Okay, so the affair started when she was pregnant, or that's when it came to a head when she was pregnant with their 4th child?
No, it starts in 1990 when she's pregnant with their 4th child.
Okay.
Which just makes him a bigger creep.
They met 4 years earlier, so probably when she was on the 2nd child.
Yes.
And it slowly built. And now she's pregnant with their 4th, and now it's going to turn romantic.
Right, and he had a different affair when she was pregnant with her 3rd child.
Yeah, which is probably why he didn't recognize this new woman in the church right away.
Right. He was already busy, dipping his paintbrush in a different can of paint. Hazel immediately caught Colin's eye when he spotted her at church with her family. Eventually, he would get more and more opportunities to speak to her and be in her vicinity. Hazel was an assistant at Mount Sindel Nursery School in Coleraine. Colin, as luck would have it, would drop his 3-year-old daughter off at the school and be greeted by the friendly lady who worked there part-time.
Convenient.
The two adults became more friendly with one another. They would chat at the school, at church, during church activities, and even at the children's swimming lessons. Before long, both Hazel and Colin began looking forward to their frequent interactions. Colin was under stress, and Hazel was feeling lonely because of Trevor's long work shifts.
You can see how it happens. But I'm thinking about Leslie at this time. She's probably thinking he's being such a good dad, taking the kids to all these activities. Oh, yeah, sure. I'll drop them off at play school. Yeah, I'll take them to the swimming lessons.
Yes, because she's pregnant and feeling like, oh, I just don't have this in me. And he's all do it.
Yeah.
Because he knows he can see Hazel. And I guess you can say that the first line that was crossed between them occurred at the pool during swim lessons in the spring of 1990. Their kids were similar ages and attended lessons at the same time. Just like you said, Leslie was feeling too pregnant to get in the water with the kids, and so Colin was happy to oblige. Hazel was one of the few moms to jump into the water. Little by little, the lesson time became less about the kids and more about getting their flirt on. While the kids were in the shallow end, Hazel and Colin drifted further and further into the deep end. Hazel decided that she needed to practice her front curl. Being a helpful guy, Colin offered to use his hands to support her body while she practiced.
Oh no. All in a public pool while the little kids are watching?
Yes. And there would have been other parents there too. I'm not a professional swimmer, but I imagine that Colin would have had his hands on this woman's stomach to support her in the water while her butt was face up, giving him the view he was after.
Oh.
While in this position, Colin broke the barrier by confessing to Hazel, quote, "I'm not having innocent thoughts about you, Hazel." Hazel replied, quote, "Well, I'm not that innocent myself." And I thought, what a cheeky girl.
With her cheeks up in the air.
Exactly. Soon after this encounter, the two hooked up in Hazel's marital bed. They expressed feeling conflicted, Hazel more so than Colin. But I guess their affair felt better than the uncomfortable guilt because they continued to sleep with one another well into the summer. They would often meet at Castle Row Forest Park to get it on. They would bump uglies and then pretend they were just friends during church services and activities.
They're just passing each other sly glances over the pews. It happens anywhere. It doesn't even have to be at church. It just happens anywhere.
True. However, the cheating couple hit a speed bump when Hazel found herself pregnant in August that same year.
Couldn't she pass it off as Trevor's?
Well, she could have, but because of his courtship with his wife, Colin knew exactly what he wanted to do about this unplanned pregnancy. He was able to convince Hazel that an abortion was the solution, and he knew exactly where to go to do it.
But how could she be sure it wasn't her husband's baby?
Well, she couldn't be. And I had actually had this in here later that I questioned if this baby could have belonged to Trevor. Before heading to London with her boyfriend, Hazel left Trevor, her husband, a note that read, quote, "Going through a really hard time. Don't worry about me. Don't try to find me. I'll be back in a few days. Love you." Unsurprisingly, Hazel and Trevor weren't in a good place together, but it was said that he was happy to see her the next day when she arrived back home, oblivious to what had just transpired. So because they were having troubles, I don't think that she was having sex with her husband as often as she was with her mistress.
Okay.
They were both assuming that the baby probably belonged to Colin.
Okay.
Regardless, thanks to a good old-fashioned tattletale, both Trevor and Leslie would soon be aware of what was going on between their spouses.
Was it a little old biddy at church?
I don't know who, but it was someone from their church. When you said that, I was like, oh, she's spot on.
They see everything.
Yes.
When you're not monitoring children in the pews, there's so much more time to monitor everybody else's activities.
Are you and I going to grow into the two little biddies sitting in the back?
We will be so suspicious. Hilarious.
It would be, actually. We'd be perfect for the job. We're suspicious of everybody after doing this podcast. But one day, Hazel and Colin were spotted together in Castle Row Forest Park. The person who saw them was a member of their congregation and quickly informed their pastor, John Hansford, about what they had witnessed. I don't think they saw anything X-rated, but enough to know that the two of them meeting in a park was highly suspicious. And it was said that members of the church were beginning to question their closeness.
They were getting a little bit too lax.
Right. And a different husband and wife meeting in a park just was not something that would happen.
And they didn't have their kids with them?
No, just the two of them.
Okay.
And their spouses weren't with them either. Pastor Hansford had previously met with Leslie. She had expressed her concerns about how much time her husband was spending with Hazel. The pastor wasted no time and went to speak with Colin at his dental office. Colin took Pastor Hansford into an exam room and lied to his face when his church leader asked him if he was having an affair with Hazel Buchanan.
What an awkward situation for that pastor. Like, these are all grown adults, and he is hall monitoring.
Yeah, totally. And that's what he continues to do, because he was not convinced that Colin was telling the truth. So the pastor went to Hazel's home to ask her the same question. She admitted to having an emotional affair, but not a physical one. Hazel told the pastor that Trevor was just ordinary, and she wanted more excitement after being raised in such a strict household. Pastor Hansford later said, quote, "I told her he may not be the exciting husband she wanted, but in terms of faithfulness, he was not to be despised, but cherished." Pastor Hansford could sense hogwash when it was being fed to him, so he reportedly went to the Howells' home and waited with Leslie, who had recently given birth, for her husband to return home from work.
He's going to call him out in front of Leslie?
Yep, because Leslie had already spoken to the pastor about her concerns with Hazel and her husband.
Awkward.
Very awkward. When Colin was confronted by both his wife and pastor, he broke down and admitted to the affair. He begged for forgiveness from both of them. From what I could gather, for a time, the affair was put on hold while both couples tried to repair their relationships. Colin focused on church, and Leslie began focusing on herself more, taking care of herself by becoming more active, eating more healthily, and doing things like dyeing her hair and purchasing tanning minutes. This made me happy and a bit sad for her. I hope she was doing these things as self-care and not in an attempt to change herself for Colin in hopes that he would desire her more than his mistress.
Because he definitely didn't deserve it.
He did not. Hazel and Trevor opened up together about their insecurities to one another. At the beginning of 1991, both couples began separate couples counseling with the pastor. This just sounded so messy, and I feel so badly for Trevor and Leslie.
Honestly, feel bad for the pastor, too.
I know.
He's getting it from both sides.
He seriously was not getting paid enough to deal with this.
No.
Trevor tried his best to dodge Colin as much as he could, even waving him through a routine traffic stop so he wouldn't have to interact with him. However, when the pastor told Trevor that Colin wanted to meet with him face-to-face with the pastor, Trevor agreed. In this meeting, Colin apologized and asked Trevor to forgive him. Trevor shook the dirtbag's hand and accepted his apology.
Blech.
Yeah. He tried his best to move on from this ordeal and would say that he wasn't perfect either.
Does that mean he had an affair too?
No, he didn't. He was a great guy.
He just recognized that people make mistakes.
Yes.
Okay.
And was trying to work past it with Hazel.
Right.
Colin and Hazel did avoid one another and cut off all communication until the pastor went away on a 6-week holiday.
It was only him keeping them apart?
Yes, that's what I think.
So while the cat's away, the mice will play.
I literally have that in my notes coming up in like 3 sentences. I said, this to me kind of felt like when the cat's away, meaning the pastor, the mice will play.
Yeah.
Totally what it was.
So they weren't repentant at all. They were just going through the motions because they had been caught. And unfortunately, Trevor and Leslie are actually trying to make the situation better.
Yes.
Like being genuine.
Right. And believing their spouses that they're trying to make things better too.
This is so messy.
It really is. Before he left, Pastor Hansford told Colin that Hazel was doing well, that she had moved on from the affair, and counseled Colin to do the same. So I think he was worried about Colin because he went up to him and was like, hey, she's doing good. Leave her alone. You need to move on too.
Yeah.
By this time, it was March. The affair had ended about 6 months prior. But Colin felt like he needed to hear it for himself that Hazel was over him.
Or he just needs to be in her presence to start manipulating her again.
And I think he was so narcissistic that hearing that Hazel's getting over him probably bothered him.
But we know that Hazel's a dirtbag too, so she obviously had a part in this.
Oh, absolutely. But had he left her alone, I don't know that they would have rekindled.
You don't think she would have reconnected on her own level?
Maybe. But she had stayed away from him for 6 months.
Well, her husband and the pastor were around.
That's true.
But she did take his call.
Yeah, she does.
So if you're really trying to avoid somebody, you cut off all ties. You don't answer the phone.
Oh, she was still pining for him for sure.
Yeah.
And we know that because Colin called up his lost mistress, and during the conversation, Hazel admitted to Colin, quote, "I will love you until I'm old and gray." Colin later described how he felt waiting for Hazel to answer the phone that day. He said it was like, quote, "holding your breath And when Hazel was glad to hear from me, it was like coming up for air. The wrong sort of air. This wrong sort of air wasn't enough to keep the two lovers apart, and the affair resumed.
I can see the appeal. This would just fan the flames of their affair.
Oh, 100% it would.
Yeah.
And I think they would have just come back even stronger into their little dirtbaggery.
And I just want to point out that they are still in the Twitterpation part of their affair.
Yes. Real life hasn't hit.
No.
I'm not sure how soon after the phone call, but one night, Colin gave his wife tranquilizers with her glass of red wine to make sure she would be out for the night. He then left the house and snuck through the woods to Hazel's backyard. Trevor was working nights, and so Hazel let Colin into the home that she shared with her husband, and they started doing the nasty once again. By April, a month after the affair started up again, Leslie became more and more suspicious of her lying pile of steaming garbage husband every time he left the house. She feared that every time he left, he was going to see Hazel.
Did she start following him?
No, but fights became more and more frequent between them.
It's so hard when there's been a break of trust.
Mm-hmm. And Colin later talking about it sounds like he was almost just annoyed with how upset she kept on getting and how much she was accusing him. Even though she was right, and this is what he was doing.
Yeah, because he's doing something wrong.
Yes. There was an incident that occurred between Leslie and Colin that he later spoke about and freaked Leslie out enough that she told a friend about. She told the friend that she was telling her about what had happened just in case anything was to happen to her.
Oh, she had a premonition.
Yeah. And this tells me that she was afraid after this experience.
We hear about victims doing this, and it always amazes me that they're going to stay then.
I know.
It just goes to show you how entrenched they are in the relationship that they don't just leave. They think they're going to be killed, or there's a good enough chance that they're warning people about it, and yet they stay.
I know. It's so sad. But you can see how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
She has a baby still. Her oldest is only 6 years old. It's really messy, like you said.
Yeah, there's just no hope.
No.
So by the way, if I end up dead, please know that my husband might have did it.
Right. So if you have a friend that ever says that to you, you need to be checking on them a lot. So let me tell you about this incident. The couple had been fighting because Colin had come home late once again. Frustrated, Leslie put on her bathrobe and started to get ready to soak in the tub. She grabbed their portable cassette player and went to plug it in near the tub. She wanted to just relax and listen to music. Having followed her into the bathroom, Colin warned her not to plug the stereo into that particular outlet because it could, quote-unquote, fall in. Leslie got into the bath. Colin later said, quote, "At one point, I sat on the edge of the bath. It was a dark moment, and she wouldn't let go of the argument that I had contacted Hazel. A thought went through my head. I want you to shut up, and I thought if I threw it in, I would kill you. Although I'd no intention of doing that." This is what he said later. So he was thinking I could just throw in the cassette player and electrocute her.
Okay.
He continued by saying, quote, "I showed Leslie the plug. I was in control. And with the unsecured loop of the cable, I flicked it across her back, then dropped the plug on the floor where it made a noise. Leslie looked at me. There was a pregnant pause and a shift of power. I was about to take power, and I wanted her to realize that. I flicked the cable and walked out the door."
So he threatened to throw it in there?
Right. He basically wanted to show her, I could have killed you right now if I wanted to. So he ended the argument, and she was left terrified as he smacked her on her wet back with the cord.
Yeah.
Colin would take his perceived level of power to an entirely new level when he came up with a plan to get rid of the two obstacles standing in the way of him and his lover being able to be together. Hazel and Colin met on May 14th to go over the plan and would strike just 4 days later.
So how did he talk Hazel into doing it?
I honestly don't know.
But she's on board because she discusses the plan with him.
She's on board. She later claims that she was manipulated into it and scared, but her actions don't really say that to me.
Okay.
You can see what you think. Colin's evil plan was put into action on the evening and early morning hours of May 18th and 19th of 1991 with the help of Hazel. To keep this account simple, I'm going to stick mostly with the court document version of what transpired that horrible night. On the evening of May 18th, Colin was prepared and patiently waited for Leslie to fall asleep on the couch in their living room. Leslie had a quilt pulled up to her neck and had fallen into a deep sleep. I say she was likely exhausted from looking after 4 small children and worrying about a cheating husband all day. Plus, it was one of their children's birthdays, and she had been preparing food and festivities that day.
Kills her on a child's birthday?
Yes, this dirtbag murdered his wife on one of their children's birthdays.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. I don't think they had the party, but I think they were preparing to celebrate.
Right. But this child is now going to associate their mother's death with their birthday every single year.
Yes.
What?
I know, so selfish. In fact, the slide that had been bought for their son as a birthday gift was in the garage, and Colin had been assembling it earlier that day. They're getting ready to celebrate the birth of their son, and he's plotting to kill his wife.
I just can't believe that he would do that on his child's birthday.
Yep. Shows how selfish he is.
Selfish is one word.
Mm-hmm.
There are many others.
But we don't swear on buried motives. The couple's garage was attached to their home. Earlier that same day, Colin had taken a long hose pipe and snugly attached and adapted one of his child's plastic baby bottles to one of the ends. He cut the end off so it would fit over the exhaust pipe of the vehicle, and then the smaller end of the bottle fit into the other opening of the hose. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And again, he's using his baby's bottle, which just makes me hate him even more. Once he had the hose secured to the tailpipe, he started the car and then carefully and quietly drug the hose into the house and set it in the living room near his wife, hoping that she would die from carbon monoxide poisoning while she slept. It didn't take long for Colin to realize that the fumes were not going to fill the entire room well enough to kill his wife as quickly as he wanted. I think he was likely worried that one of the kids would wake up or that he would poison them all.
Mm-hmm.
Colin crept over to his sleeping wife and placed the poison-filled hose underneath her quilt so the fumes would go directly to her face. When he did this, Leslie started to stir. Afraid that she was waking up, Colin raced over to her and held the blanket over her head and forced the hose to stay near her face. Frightened, Leslie hollered out for their oldest son to help her, but it would be too late. Colin held the blanket over Leslie's head, forcing her to inhale deadly fumes until he was sure she was dead.
Wow.
Colin then went to the garage and stood by the Renault 21 estate car and waited a few more minutes for good measure before finally turning off the vehicle. He waited a while longer and then went back to Leslie.
Did their child ever come down?
No.
Oh, thank goodness.
No, thankfully they all slept through this. Leslie had been wearing a nightgown, so he dressed her in a t-shirt and leggings and then picked up the limp body of his wife, the mother of his children, and placed her inside the trunk of the car. He covered her body with a white sheet and then placed a bicycle on top of it. My guess is it was a kid's bike.
Why wouldn't he just put her in the car and stage the suicide?
Because he wasn't done yet.
He's going to do more horrific things to her? Killing her wasn't enough.
Not to her, but he's going to do more horrific things. But before we get to that, I was questioning if he even opened the windows and waited to clear the air. I didn't read anything about that, but it seems to me that he was putting the entire household at risk. But carbon monoxide poisoning is not my area of expertise, so I don't know.
Yeah, there would be a lot in the house.
Yeah.
Probably not enough to kill his children, but enough to give them some side effects, headaches, and sleepiness.
Maybe. They were all sleeping upstairs. Before leaving the house around 1 o'clock a.m., Colin called his mistress but hung up before the first ring, as planned, and then waited for her to call back. This was how they would call each other in secret during their affair. When she called back, he told her that he was, quote, finished with Leslie and on his way over. Right before leaving, Colin thought to grab a few photographs and Leslie's portable cassette player. I assume a Walkman, with it being 1991. With Leslie in the boot of the car, Colin drove over to the Buchanan's home. Hazel was ready and waiting for him and led him into the house through their garage door.
Is Trevor home at this time?
Trevor is. Hazel had given Trevor a pill to help sedate him. I read in different reports that Trevor was having a hard time sleeping, and so Hazel gave him the sedative, but I also read that she crushed it up into his food. Either way, he trusted her and had no idea what was in store for him while he slept. Colin began by replicating what he had just done to his wife. He attached the same hose to his running car and then laid the open end on Trevor's pillow. After about 2 or 3 minutes, Trevor woke and lifted his head. Watching from outside the room, Colin quickly ran to the bed and tried to force the blanket over Trevor's head like he had done with Leslie.
Oh, but he's so much bigger and stronger.
Yes, and Trevor fought back. During the struggle, the two men fell off the side of the bed onto the floor. Despite hitting his head, Colin was able to force the end of the hose straight into Trevor's mouth. He held the hose there until Trevor's body went limp. Colin later admitted that he and Trevor looked at one another and that Trevor knew who was doing this to him.
awful.
And I read in one account that the blanket kind of got wrapped around Trevor's arm weird, and that's how he was able to hold him down.
Yeah, because if he is an officer, you'd think that he would know how to maneuver and wrestle.
Oh yeah, Trevor would have beat him in a fight.
Ugh.
But he was sedated, he was awoken suddenly, and then he had got him tangled in this blanket, which was just too much for anybody. While her lover murdered her husband and the father of her 2 small children, Hazel stood in the next room with her hands over her ears so she didn't have to hear Trevor struggling. And this gave me Gypsy Rose vibes, because didn't she hide in the bathroom while her boyfriend was killing her mom?
Yep.
That's what it made me think of.
So is she charged with being accessory?
We'll get there.
Okay.
Once on the floor, Colin placed a blanket over Trevor's head and fled the room into the backyard to make sure that he wouldn't be affected by the fumes. He was feeling dizzy and got a little worried. He left the hose under the blanket with Trevor for a few minutes to make sure that the job was complete before turning off the vehicle. So I think during the struggle, he had held a little bit of it. After Trevor was dead, Hazel gave Colin some of Trevor's clothing to dress his body with. A shirt, jeans, socks, and shoes. I think she had actually already set out the clothing for Colin. Colin placed Trevor's body into the boot of the car on top of his wife, covered them both with the sheet and bike, and then fled the second crime scene.
Wait, the size of boot?
It's like a wagon, the vehicle.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Before he left, he handed Hazel the hose pipe and baby bottle and told her to clean up and burn the evidence in the fire. Initially, Colin drove to Castle Rock. His plan was to abandon the car in Barmouth. But then, at the last minute, he got a better idea. To try and avoid suspicion, Colin drove the car to his father-in-law's abandoned home in Castle Rock. Leslie's father had recently passed away, and so the house was empty. He had actually collapsed and died only days prior to this.
Is he going to make it look like they're having the affair?
He's going to make it look like something that it wasn't. The father-in-law's house on 6 Cliff Terrace was one in a row of cottages overlooking the village known locally as the 12 Apostles. Colin parked the car inside the garage of the home and placed Trevor's body in the driver's seat to make it appear like he had driven the vehicle there. He left the driver's side door open and one of the windows of the vehicle was still rolled down. Leslie he left in the trunk of the car. He placed the family photos around her and then positioned earphones on her head and pressed play on her handheld stereo, making it look like she was listening to soothing gospel music and looking at her family when she passed.
But she's in the trunk of a car.
Yes. But next, he positioned a vacuum cleaner hose from the tailpipe into the trunk of the car. He turned on the car engine, exited the garage, closing the door behind him, and then left. He had hidden a bike at Castle Rock Beach earlier so that he would have a way to get home. Colin jogged to the beach and then pedaled the rest of the way home. He had thought of everything, proving that every part of this double homicide was premeditated.
So he's trying to make it look like these two had a suicide pact?
Yes, that's exactly what he was trying to make it look like.
And with Leslie's past history of depression, it kind of makes sense, but how does Trevor fit into that?
We'll talk about how Trevor fits into that, actually. When Colin arrived home, about 4 hours after the horror began, he immediately went and checked on his 4 sleeping children. At the time, they had a son, aged 6, who Leslie had called out for in a panic, a daughter aged 4, and 2 more sons, ages 2 and around 9 months. And I purposely left out their names. Only one of the names I'll put in later. The children were still fast asleep, having no idea yet that when their mother tucked them into bed that night, that it would be for the very last time. Before going to bed, Colin burned the white sheet he had taken from the crime scene that he had placed over the bodies and the surgical gloves that he was wearing during the crimes, which I am sure he just got from work. He then called Hazel and let her know that everything went according to plan. Early the next morning, Colin put his acting skills into action. It was a Sunday. Around 8:30, Colin phoned one of the church elders, Jim Flanagan. He acted distraught and asked Jim if he would help him look for Leslie. Colin told Jim that Leslie had driven off with Trevor the night before, so he believed that she was still with him. When Jim got to the Howells' home, he saw Colin holding their baby and the 3 other children playing around him. Colin immediately handed Jim a note that he said he discovered that morning. The note read, quote, "Dear Colin, I'm just trying to go to sleep now. How long, I don't know. Thank you for your help over the past few days and for the good times in our marriage.
What? Puke?
I don't know what to say to you because I don't know how I feel, but I have seen that life goes on after a few weeks of pain. And let's face it, Colin, I am nothing in comparison to what you lost in the one you loved a while back. If I wake up in the morning, just let this be our secret. All my love, Leslie.
What?
Mm-hmm. Now, I actually believe that this note was written by Leslie, but just not at this particular time.
She had attempted suicide before?
She had.
Oh, and those were her actual words?
I think so.
That just makes it even more sad that she felt that way.
Yes. That I'm not good enough for you.
Yeah.
You might as well be with Hazel. When Leslie had first learned about Colin and Hazel's affair, she fell deeper into depression and had taken an overdose of paracetamol tablets before leaving the house. She was discovered and then taken to Coleraine Hospital, where she stayed for several days.
So he had previously found this note but never told anybody about it?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think he kept it for these purposes? Hey, maybe I'll be able to use this later on?
Could have. I don't know.
Because why don't you disclose a note at that time? Like if you're wanting somebody to get help, you let the therapist, the doctors know everything that you found.
Right. Which I don't think that he did, because later, police don't find it suspicious. Colin gave Jim Leslie's father's home address and asked him to see if Leslie had gone there. To Jim, I think this wouldn't sound too weird given that Leslie had just lost her father and might have gone there when distressed to feel closer to him.
Right. It would be a place of comfort.
Right. But he immediately was like, go check her dad's place. Jim went to the home but came back and said he didn't see them. It sounded like he might have just driven by and didn't see any signs of them there. The car was inside the closed garage and wouldn't have been visible from the street. Colin must have been shocked when Jim came back and said he didn't find anything.
Sorry, part of me is like, I hope he just panicked for a minute that they both weren't dead and they were coming to get him.
Oh, I hope. I didn't even think of that. I hope he was sweating in his boots a little.
Just for a brief instant.
Yes. He deserved to feel that.
Yeah.
Colin was obviously wanting his wife and his lover's husband to be found because just before 9:00 a.m., Colin, acting all worried, called another friend and asked him to go and check the 12 apostles for any sign of his wife or Trevor. This man's wife just so happened to receive a phone call from Hazel around the same time, who was in a quote-unquote distressed state, so they went to go check on Hazel instead. In the meantime, Jim had gone to the morning service at the church. Jim is the guy he first called. At around 12:45 p.m., before the meeting was over, Colin again called Jim, asking him to go back and check the 12 apostles. This time he offered to give him a key to get inside of Leslie's father's house.
Why wouldn't he just go himself?
Well, he's got all the kids at home, and the car's
missing. So you
missing.
have somebody else stay, and you go to the property that you're familiar with. If you're really concerned about somebody, you want to look for them.
Yeah, you call a babysitter and go looking.
Exactly. Where's the pastor? He knows what's going on.
Right?
He needs to be the one investigating.
Yeah. Jim agreed to go, but this time asked a police officer to go with him. Constable David Green obliged, and the two men entered Leslie's father's home at around 1:20 that afternoon.
Is this constable somebody that Trevor works with?
I assume he would have been, but this guy was kind of a rookie from what I understood. I could be wrong, but it sounded like he was. Constable Green began checking the bedrooms as Jim headed back towards the garage. When he opened the large garage door, he saw the Howells' car backed into the stall. He could see Trevor slumped over in the front seat. Jim hollered out to Constable Green as he walked closer to the car. He then discovered Leslie's body with the headphones on. Leslie's late father's home quickly became swarmed with officers. Upon further inspection, Trevor's right hand was on the steering wheel. One of his legs was inside the car, almost underneath his body, and the other one had fallen out as he slumped over. The car keys were still in the on position inside the ignition. 3 framed pictures were found beside Leslie's body. One was, of course, of her and Colin. One was of her and her mother. And the third was of her brother, and their father.
None of her children?
No, surprisingly, there were no photos of Leslie and Colin's children beside her.
That would ring odd to me.
And it should have. If you are a parent and you are listening to this, would you believe for one moment that if Leslie had been planning to end her life while listening to music and looking at photographs of those whom she loved the most, that she would have neglected to bring photos of her children with her?
Yeah, it seems odd.
Not for 1 second. I'm not buying it, but shockingly, the police did.
They believed that they had committed suicide together.
Yes. The deaths of Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan were ruled as a double suicide. Leslie was 31 and Trevor was 32 years old.
Other than the affair between their spouses, was there any connection that Trevor and Leslie had at all? That they would be friendly enough to even consider doing this together?
No, just connected in their tragedy.
Yeah, you don't just go do this with somebody that you don't have any connection with.
Right?
Well, how does that not ring odd?
So many things should have rung bells, and we're going to talk about that. But police believed that Leslie was depressed after finding out that her husband was having an affair and grew in despair after her father died just 12 days before her own death. It was assumed that both Trevor and Leslie were so distraught that they decided to end their lives together, since they both understood what the other one was going through. Everyone believed this heinous lie for almost 2 decades.
What?
Yes, before the truth of what happened that night was finally revealed.
Who comes clean?
Colin actually comes clean.
Really?
Yes.
See, Hazel is a dirtbag.
I know, she did not come clean, and she denies when she's caught.
I don't mean that Colin isn't a dirtbag, but she was able to keep the secret longer than him.
Yep. She would still be keeping the secret, I think.
Was it a deathbed confession that he made?
No.
Oh, it wasn't.
It's not. And I'm going to go through what finally pushes him to confess. It's actually quite ironic. But the police just believed that these two had killed themselves together. And I think that's partly why the case was so mishandled. I found a 63-page report later put out by the police relating to the investigation into the deaths of Trevor and Leslie. We don't ever like to hate on the police, but they missed a lot in their investigation.
Well, it's so hard when you're looking at it from the wrong lens. You're thinking it's a suicide and it's actually a homicide.
Right. But I think they just immediately thought suicide, and then everything just kind of, oh yeah, that fits.
Mm-hmm. Tunnel vision.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it does happen.
Yeah, unfortunately. I will go over just a few of the things stated in the document. An RUC photographer only submitted 16 photographs of the crime scene, but that included duplicates, so in actuality, only 8 photos were taken. Of these 8 photos, only 6 were of inside the garage. The other 2 were of the garage exterior. And there was only 1 photo of Trevor and 3 of Leslie.
Oh.
No one checked to see if the gas tank was empty or how much of Leslie's cassette tape had been played. In fact, they didn't seem to check many things. The garage was not treated like a crime scene. They hadn't even dusted for fingerprints.
Didn't Trevor show signs of having a struggle?
Yes, but those get overlooked. We're going to talk about that too. The officer who discovered the bodies with Jim had reported many things to his superiors that were allegedly just dismissed, which shocked me considering that one of the victims was one of their own. However, when he originally called it in, he said that he discovered a double suicide. Once he checked for signs of life, he and Jim exited the garage and waited for the more seasoned officers to arrive.
Which seems like a good decision.
Yes. The bodies were said to be cold, and because of signs of lividity, it was suggested that both victims had been deceased for about 12 hours. However, no sketches or measurements were taken at the scene of anything. Colin told the officers that he and Trevor had gotten into a fight the night before, and that is how he bumped his head. Hazel was supposed to tell police that she heard her husband talking to Leslie around 3 or 4 in the morning, which she did. She said she didn't go downstairs to see what they were talking about because she and Leslie were not exactly on speaking terms anymore.
But wouldn't she find it suspicious if another woman is talking with her husband?
Well, she knew it was her lover's wife. She knew it was Leslie.
But that's still suspicious. At 4 a.m. in the morning?
She probably made it sound like, oh, she came over and was just crying about everything. Yeah. But she says, but I didn't go down there because we're not really friends right now. Yeah, friends off, Hazel, when you sleep with her husband.
And when you plan their murder.
Yes. Colin and Hazel admitted to the affair, both saying that they woke in the morning to discover that their disgruntled spouses were nowhere to be found. I think the admission of the affair and Leslie's possible previous attempt on her life allowed police to just go along with their initial assumptions that this was a double suicide. To me, it seems like it was one of those situations where they were just satisfied to allow the evidence to support their theory. To fuel the fire, Colin also told the police that Leslie had started taking temazepam tablets and consumed a lot more wine since her father passed away. Colin claimed that Leslie told him that she was going to move to London with the kids so that he could have Hazel all to himself. Plus, he said he found the suicide note on the kitchen floor in the morning, and the evening before that, after his and Trevor's altercation, she had passed out from drinking on the couch.
But she had somehow awoken and drove herself to her father's house?
Right. But he's saying the last I saw her, I went to bed after she passed out on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
The post-mortem examination of Trevor and Leslie didn't suggest foul play. They were both healthy adults. Trevor did have scrapes on his knees, but this was considered of, quote, trivial nature.
Well, I can kind of see that if he is an officer and does other things, right? Like they know he's a physical guy. Mm-hmm. Scrapes on the knees aren't like a dead giveaway. I'm thinking there should be struggle marks around where the blanket was held against him.
Well, there are other marks that are not put in the report that I learned about in the 63-page document later.
Oh.
And of course, by the time this is all being looked at, a lot of the people who were involved had passed away.
Right.
So couldn't even give firsthand account.
It's 2 decades later.
Yes. When this case was later under investigation, it was discovered by one of the photos taken of his body that Trevor had injuries around his mouth and nose and had blood coming from the back of his head. None of this was recorded in the postmortem report.
Was that all missed?
That is a really good question.
That is unfortunate.
Yes. Both deaths were ruled as carbon monoxide poisoning. Trevor's blood was at a fatal 71% concentration of carboxyhemoglobin, and Leslie's was 61%. Trevor's was likely higher because he had the hose shoved into his mouth and inhaled it directly. Leslie's blood also had a blood alcohol reading above the legal driving limit, and there were traces of temazepam, diazepam, and nordazepam, and I might have said some of those wrong. Trevor had no alcohol in his blood, but he did have traces of temazepam in his system. All levels were considered to fall in the quote-unquote therapeutic range, so not overdoses.
Right. And the temazepam probably came from Leslie's prescription.
Yes, because Colin had given her the pills.
Yeah.
One of Trevor's colleagues stated at the time of the investigation that Trevor was not doing well. He described him as being in, quote, very bad form. This friend was so worried that he even went to one of the congregation's church leaders for advice and help for Trevor. Trevor had also requested leave from work twice to sort out family problems. So to the investigators, it didn't seem that far-fetched that Leslie and Trevor could have gone through with a suicide pact. The official report suggested that neither one of the deceased could come to terms with their spouse's infidelities despite seeking help from the church, and it was believed that Leslie was, quote, most likely the motivating factor in both of them taking their lives.
So they blamed her for coming up with the idea.
Yeah. Because the deaths were considered suicide, neither places of their deaths, Leslie's living room or Trevor's bedroom, were inspected.
Because they weren't even looking for another location.
They weren't. After interviewing everyone involved, police never found it suspicious that Colin had directed 2 different people to go and look for Leslie at 6 Cliff Terrace at the 12 Apostles. Blood was later seen on Trevor's sweatshirt, but ignored, and Leslie's clothing was never even examined. There are more things that went wrong in the investigation, but we just don't have time to go through all 63 pages of it. The truth wouldn't come out until January 29th, 2009. 18 years later, it would come to light that the original double suicide was in fact a double homicide. And ironically, like I already said, the truth was not figured out by the police, instead because of Colin's confession. But let me explain what led up to the confession almost 2 decades later.
I'm still shocked that he confessed.
I know, I was shocked too. With their spouses out of the way, Colin and Hazel continued their relationship. And I just question, how do you even look at each other in the face after going through with something so evil? And how could you even ever trust one another?
Well, I bet you it was an escalation of commitment.
Probably.
We have committed murder together, and so now we have to follow it through. Think about how Colin was feeling after they had abortions with Leslie. They had to get married.
Right.
An escalation of commitment.
Yes, you're exactly right, I think. But that commitment only lasted for 5 years. They enjoyed knocking boots for 5 years before eventually breaking up. You killed your spouses for a measly 5 years together.
You killed the parents of your children for a measly 5 years. Your children missed their parents for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how anybody can claim to love their children and do that to that child's parent on their birthday.
I know, on their birthday. And using the baby bottle.
Yeah.
And just get divorced.
Right.
If you want to be together, just divorce them and be together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad. But we'll find out too that this 5 years wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. And I was glad to hear that, to be honest.
Oh, how could it be?
Right. During the 5 years, though, the couple were able to enjoy the money from Leslie's life insurance policy. They don't believe this was a motivating factor, but it was...
Little cherry on top.
Exactly. Colin received $202,446 from Leslie's will, $27,000 that she had inherited from her father's estate, $120,000 from an insurance policy, and $54,635 from an endowment policy. Total this all up, and that is over $414,000 in 1991. Today, that would be over 924,000 pounds sterling and over 1.6 million Canadian dollars. if I did my conversions correctly.
And did they blow through it in the 5 years and that's why they split?
No.
Oh.
But stuff does happen to the money that we're going to get to. And I am unsure what Hazel received for Trevor's death. I assume something with him being an officer.
Mm-hmm. You assume there would be at least a pension.
Yeah. With this newfound cash, Colin paid off all his debts, including his mortgage, and his dental practice really began to flourish. He was just living his best lousy little life. After the deadly duo split up, they were both able to move on.
They had other relationships after that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, quite quickly it seemed too. Hazel started to see a man named Trevor McCauley. Yes, another Trevor. The two had dated 20 years earlier when Hazel was a teenager, and somehow the two reunited. Trevor McCauley paid for a gym membership for Hazel. While at the gym, Hazel became acquainted with a man named David Stewart. David was a former chief superintendent with the RUC. One thing led to another, and eventually Hazel was cheating on her boyfriend Trevor with Chief Superintendent David. I don't know if David knew Hazel's husband Trevor Buchanan from the RUC, but either way, that left a really bad taste in my mouth.
He's a serial offender, a serial adulterer.
Yes, and a badge chaser.
Yes.
A badge bunny, is that what they call them?
I don't know, but okay, I'll go with it.
Yeah. Hazel and David were wed during the summer of 2005, and I think they were still married when the truth came out. And I didn't find any reports of divorce after, but it doesn't mean that that didn't happen. Colin was also married when he finally confessed. In December of 1996, Colin hosted a Christian singles night in his home. When I did the math, this had to have been shortly after breaking up with Hazel.
Of course. He can't be alone. That's where he gets his ego stroked from.
Yeah, I think you're right. But you literally killed two people to be with this woman, and then, let's have a singles night. A Christian singles night. At this event, 37-year-old Colin fell for a 30-year-old woman named Kyle Jorgensen. She had moved from New York with her 2 small children in hopes of fleeing a bad marriage. Colin married Kyle less than a year after meeting in 1997. They had 6 children between them. They had their first child together a year after the wedding, and 3 additional children over the next 10 years, so 10 kids in total to raise together.
That is a lot.
Yes. Colin finally confessed after he began believing that God was punishing him for what he did.
How was he being punished?
In multiple ways, but there was 2 big signs for Colin. One of his big signs was being swindled out of £353,000 from a scam in the Philippines.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the only way that he got involved with that scam was because he was being a greedy dirtbag.
Yes. He thought he was going to make millions. Colin thought he was investing in recovering gold that had been hidden in chambers by Japan near the end of World War II. Colin's lawyer questioned if Colin knew this was a scam and was subconsciously trying to punish himself. He said, quote, "Was that a symptom of Colin Howell seeking out his own destruction, his downfall? I say hogwash. I think Colin saw dollar signs at the promise of millions of pounds worth of gold."
Yeah. And that was his lawyer's way of trying to elicit sympathy from whoever he told that hogwash to.
Yes. I think that afterwards, he started to question if God was giving him his just comeuppance, because he was sure he was going to strike it rich. The other major thing that happened in Colin's life that pushed him to turn himself in was when his oldest son suddenly died in 2007. Matthew was the child that Leslie called out for during her murder, a fact that Colin said always haunted him. He said he could hear her over and over hollering out for Matthew. When Matthew was just 22 and attending college, he fell to his death from a balcony in Russia after losing his footing on the stairwell. This was a total accident and happened while he was there as an exchange student.
That is tragic.
It really is. Colin, being a religious man, saw the death of his son as punishment from God. He fully believed that Matthew's life was taken because of his own sins, the sins of the father. I'm not sure which incident came first. I think it might have been the death of his son. But either way, Colin decided to walk into the police station on January 29th, 2009, and confess to the double murder that he and Hazel had committed years earlier. He wanted the perceived consequences of his actions to stop, and turning himself in his eyes, was the only way to do that.
So it wasn't that he was remorseful. He just wanted bad stuff to stop happening to him.
Yeah, it was for a selfish reason. I'm being punished and I can't handle any more of this.
And he did throw Hazel under the bus too.
He did.
Does he tell the exact truth or the whole truth?
I think he does, yep.
Okay.
Because he wants this curse lifted. Before going to the station, Colin called the church elders and asked them to come to his house so that he could make a confession. Apparently, Colin had already confessed affairs that he had on his wife Kyle, so they assumed it was another case of his wandering loins.
Can pastors just refuse to accept somebody's confession? He'd be like, you don't mean it anyway, so go tell the wall.
I don't know. I'm not a pastor, so I don't know. But they were like, oh, here we go. He's dipped it somewhere else again. This time, though, the church elders were in for a surprise, not to mention an earful. Colin confessed that he had been swindled in the scam. He admitted to the abortions that he persuaded both Leslie and Hazel to have. Next, and this is going to blow your mind, Colin confessed to sexually molesting some of his patients while they were under dental sedation.
Ugh.
He had been doing this for a span of a decade, 1998 to 2008. He said he just couldn't control his sexual urges.
He was addicted to pornography.
He was just a dirty pig. People can be addicted to pornography and not do these things.
Yeah.
And such a vulnerable situation that these women were in under sedation.
And no one suspected him of it? Like nobody had raised allegations or concerns about him?
Nobody.
Oh, that is so scary.
It is.
Would you ever consent to going under sedation in a dentist office?
I don't know. I would be like, I want the assistant there the whole entire time.
I would like this whole procedure videotaped.
Yes, that's a good idea.
That's scary and so vulnerable. You wouldn't even know what had happened to you. Could you imagine leaving the dentist office and feeling sore afterwards and being like, what the heck happened?
Yeah.
Oh, that's gross.
You'd be thinking back, like, why would I be feeling that way? Like, you would not think that the dentist just did that.
No, but he must be feeling like there's something coming for him because he's admitting everything.
He is. He's laying it all out.
Yeah.
So I think he really believed that God was punishing him because he had literally gotten away with murder for almost 2 decades.
And not just murder. So many more things.
Right.
Yeah.
Which just shows how cunning and how smart he was about going about his actions. He did plan this perfect murder that he got away with. And then for 10 years was molesting women in his dental chair while they were unconscious or sedated.
Gross.
I cannot imagine what the elders were thinking when Colin told them that there was more. Colin told the men that he had killed Trevor and Leslie and staged it to look like a double suicide. With Colin's blessing, the elders called the police, and Colin was taken into custody at the Coleraine police station.
Wait, with his blessing? So does that mean they wouldn't have called the police had he not said it was okay? Like that would have been a whole pastor privilege thing?
Honestly, I don't know. But their first reaction was to say, Colin, we need to tell the police. They talked to him and counseled him about it, and he's like, yeah, you're right, let's call them. I think he was planning to turn himself in anyways, but first wanted to ask for forgiveness from the church elders.
It makes me sick that he is viewing forgiveness this way.
Mm-hmm. But when I said with Colin's blessing, just meaning that he was there with them, it's not like they left and then decided, let's call the police. It was all together.
He was on board with it.
Right.
Okay.
As far as the confidentiality thing goes, I don't know. I don't know in the Baptist church how that works. I think it's only if they know they're going to be hurting somebody. Melissa did a quick Google search. What does it tell you?
It's any person who overhears a confession is likewise bound by the seal. Priests may not reveal what they have learned during a confession to anyone, even under the threat of their own death or that of others.
Oh, so that's for a Catholic priest. So it might be similar for a Baptist pastor. So maybe they didn't have to. Maybe they needed to get his blessing to do that. Colin admitted his sins to the officers, and although he did most of the work, he was honest about Hazel's involvement. She needed to sedate Trevor since he was an officer and Colin was worried about his firearm. Hazel had to also open the garage door, remove Trevor's car from the garage, set out clothes for Colin to redress him, and then burn evidence and cover for Colin. She had also known about the murderous plan days prior and did nothing to stop him, nor did she say anything afterwards. And her husband was an officer. If she wanted to stop him, she could have.
Mm-hmm.
Hazel was arrested, and both were charged with the murders of their spouses, so 2 counts each. Colin at first pleaded not guilty, but then changed his plea to guilty.
What?
Yeah.
After he confessed?
Yeah. But then he was like, okay, yeah, no, I did do it. Unlike her counterpart, Hazel pleaded not guilty and stuck with it. She said she was being manipulated and controlled by Colin. Hazel had admitted that she had assisted Colin, but was frightened of him and feared that if she didn't comply, he would have murdered her and her 2 children. Hazel said about Colin, quote, he controlled me, he decided, and he planned this. I want to say sorry to Trevor's family. My guilt was horrendous. My shame. I hated him. He was capable of doing everything. I was scared for my children. I don't know if it was love or fear. He had control over me. It was like I was his little robot.
I don't know if I buy that.
Again, she had 18 years to come clean.
Yeah. And she didn't come clean until compelled by his confession.
Right. And then pleaded not guilty the whole time and is still pleading that she's not guilty.
Does she take any accountability?
Not really. No. Yeah. Not that I read. Thankfully, though, both were found guilty of the murders of Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan. The sentencing judge at Colin's trial, Justice Hart, described the crimes as, quote, truly heinous and cold-blooded. He said that Colin, quote, carefully planned and ruthlessly executed double murder of the two people who Howell saw as standing in the way of his adulterous desire to be with Hazel Buchanan. The judge also pointed out that both murders were carried out while the victims were sleeping, making them entirely defenseless, which was also his sexual assaults was while they were defenseless.
Mm-hmm.
The judge also spoke about the 6 other victims in the case, the children that belonged to Leslie and Trevor. He also mentioned how the lies tarnished the reputation of the victims. The children and all those who loved them were told that they had taken their own lives in a suicide pact. Victim impact statements were read by family members on both sides, including some of the children, and Leslie's only sibling, her brother. On December 3rd, 2010, Colin was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Hazel's trial began in February, and she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum period of 18 years for her part in the murders. Colin testified against his once lover. The judge said that she could have done something to prevent the murders.
Was he ever held accountable for what he did to his patients?
Yes, he does, because on May 17th, 2011, Colin pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting 9 female patients in his surgery who were under sedation at the time. He was given a sentence of 5.5 years for 12 charges against 5 of them, and was stripped of his National Health Service pension. Despite being in a few brawls, including an ongoing feud with a prisoner given the nickname Neighbor from Hell, Colin is said to be a model prisoner and is popular with guards and fellow inmates.
Puke.
Yep.
We hate that term.
We do. Colin says that Howells typically live for a long time and that he'll be able to practice dentistry abroad after he is released.
What?
Yeah. No one is going to go under sedation with you, Colin.
What country would grant him a license with that history?
I don't know. Hopefully none. From what I could gather, Colin is still in jail at the high-security Maghaberry prison in Northern Ireland. His earliest release would be in 2031. He was given a temporary release to attend his father's funeral in 2018 and is working on writing children's books.
What?
No, thank you. Don't buy his books, anybody. Hazel is currently serving out her sentence at Hyde Bank Prison in Belfast. She and some of her family still claim her innocence. Both of Hazel's children were devastated at her guilty verdict and now felt like they had lost both of their parents.
It would be so hard for the children in this case.
Yeah, it sounds like both of her children don't believe that she's guilty.
That she didn't take part or that she was coerced?
That she was coerced.
So they're buying her story.
Yes. Hazel has already had a few appeals denied, but I don't believe she is giving up quite yet. Hazel also claims that Colin raped her while they were together after the murders, that he would sedate her to have sex with her. The Public Prosecution Service had decided not to prosecute Colin for her claims. But just in 2021, Hazel's lawyers said that they were going to challenge that decision, saying she is being discriminated against because she is in prison. On the flip side, many think that Hazel's sexual assault claims against her past lover is just a way to try and convince the courts that she was under Colin's control when she aided in the double murders.
When did she bring up the idea of being raped? Was it during the initial trial?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was after. I don't know what is true, but honestly, I wouldn't put it past him.
No. But at the same time, why wouldn't she bring that up originally?
She could have.
Okay.
It was just said that they weren't pressing charges for that. When she was being sentenced, the judge said about her, quote, I consider that she has expressed little real remorse for what she did. Rather, the sorrow and regret which she expressed to the police was largely because of the situation in which she found herself, and not for the events in which she played a part. So basically, she was sorry she was caught more than feeling guilt over what she had done.
Yeah.
Hazel's earliest possible release is coming up in 2029. Speaking of accusations, after the fact, some people strongly believe that Colin might have had something to do with Leslie's father's death only 12 days before her murder to inherit her portion of his estate after he killed her. Again, I have no information supporting that.
That would mean that the money was a bigger motivator.
It would, which I don't really think so. Regarding his children, as far as I could tell, only one of Colin's remaining children has visited him in jail. She stated, quote, "I can't believe what he's done, and I'll never understand why. But I have seen him, and if I didn't believe his remorse was genuine, I wouldn't see him. At the end of the day, he's my father, and I love him." Colin's wife, Kyle, apparently knew about the murders, but never turned her husband in. She said she stayed for the kids' sake. She was never prosecuted. After his conviction, Kyle went back to the United States with her children and filed for a divorce from her dirtbag husband. Last I heard, she was in Florida. About learning about Colin's crimes, Kyle said, "I was so freaked out and scared. I felt trapped. I was here alone in Ireland."
That would be super vulnerable too.
Mm-hmm. I think it was in their first year of marriage when she was rather pregnant or had just given birth that he told her. So a vulnerable time.
And I wonder if he told her because she was vulnerable and to scare her into staying.
Maybe. Yeah, like you're mine now.
Yeah.
With all of this said, most of the people who knew Colin and Hazel in 2009, when Colin finally spilled the beans, were said to be shocked that they could have done what they did. They were considered upstanding citizens. Colin's lawyer made a statement about Colin's warped thinking at the time of the killings. He said about Colin, quote, "So distorted was his thinking that he thought that he was doing something that was good and that would relieve the victims from their pain and sorrow following this affair." So to me, this speaks to Colin's narcissism. I was basically putting them out of their misery.
Yeah. Put yourself out of your own misery.
Yeah. I will end with a quote from Colin. After confessing, he said to the detectives, quote, "I know I lived in a world of believing I could do anything, like a fantasy world where I could do anything, and so I probably believed I could do it and get away with it. And to that I say he did." Colin and Hazel would still be walking the streets of Northern Ireland if he hadn't been punished by God first and persuaded to come clean. And that is the story of the calculated, callous, manipulative, and evil dentist who let his sexual desires overrule all else, eventually leading him to murder the cowardly dirtbag Colin Howell and his dirtbag lover, Hazel Buchanan.
Wow. What a crazy case.
It really was. I really took a deep dive into this case. So thanks again to Nicola for recommending this case. We appreciate all of you from wherever you are, and we hope you keep listening.
And we'll be back with one more listener request next week.
So until then,
see ya.
Bye.
Oh, yeah, it's me. You're nodding your head. I'm like, yeah, it's good. Okay, good. Ready anytime.
But I had to do little eyes. It's you. Your turn.
I was reading a court document. I need to turn off my
screen. That off. You have to pay attention to this one or you'll get confused.
I get distracted. Okay.
Colin Howell was born in Portadown, Northern Ireland. Ireland. So talk to your kids about sex. It's a love square. I was thinking that today when I was getting ready. I'm like, it's not a love triangle. It's a love square. Love square.
Love square. Baby, love square. Okay, never mind. I understand now. I'm a little bit slow today.
Okay. That Leslie had Starking. Colin also told police that Leslie had Stark of Carbo XY hemoglobin. Carboxy hemoglobin. Okay, yeah.
Good luck editing that. Perfect.
I forgot what we say at the end.
Good job, Christy.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.